We are now.
Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to start again. Okay. So anyway, here we are the day before Election Day. And what we were saying a little bit, planetary forces, according to my astrologist. Mercury retrograding. Mercury is about travel, but also communication. So of course, right now, we had a huge glitch in our Zoom class. Okay, so confusion, wires crossed, transportation. Mercury is about communication and connection. So, missing this, missing that. Okay, so we're right in the middle of two retrograde patterns. And there's some doubt as to whether or not we'll know for a period of time who wins the election tomorrow. And I guess what I picked out a section. It's very important that we win the election. Okay, no matter what happens tomorrow, we probably have our hopes on this or that. We win. We claim ourselves as ourselves. Okay? And sometimes, world events or national events, but this is a world event because America is a world power, United States, that, there's a great amount of importance. Okay? But I thought what I'd do is go through a little bit of Osensei's words on World War II. That was obviously, there's an election. It seems a little bit like it's a world war because there's just so much division in this country right now. But he was in an actual war, okay? And a lot of his development came during that war. So I thought what I'd do is just read a couple of words from him, and then we'll go into the other room, and we will. So, okay. Now I had everything. Oh yeah, here it is. Heretofore, warriors were taught that the only way to protect a country, and this is again, protect our freedoms, protect democracy, things like that apply here, was to learn how to cut down an enemy and how to attack anyone who posed a threat. Now, these days, we would kind of say that is a form of what we call toxic masculinity, masculine energy taken to a very extreme. But, that was part of the traditional nature of Japanese martial arts. After World War II, however, there was a movement to establish world peace and use nuclear power not for destruction, but for peaceful purposes. Aikido, too, came into being in order to foster and promote peaceful coexistence. From now on, I believe we should use the principle of love to wage our battles. So he's talking about a progression that instead of looking at things as in like we must win, that we win our battles through love. Okay, and this theme is kind of expounded upon as we go forward. During the war, the fighting became more and more fierce, and I saw that defeat was inevitable. The gods, and he refers here to Kami, told me the world is in terrible trouble. One after the other, young men are being sent to be slaughtered. This dreadful state of affairs has come about because of the inability of nations to rid themselves of hate and contention. And we're talking about today and the elections tomorrow. The war, this country is so divided because of hate and contention. And so it's very similar to his situation during World War II. Okay? It is up to you to give your all in order to stop this war. This was the inspiration I had, and I hoped that I would be able to accomplish such a great task. I had the intuition that Hiroshima would soon be destroyed and the war would end. But given the circumstances, I had to keep my mission hidden. So he sort of knew about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay. What I could do was establish a Takemusu Aiki dojo dedicated to peace and acting as a beacon to the world. I kept my thoughts to myself, devoting myself to building the dojo, trusting that such an act would help bring an end to the war. And sure enough, the war did end. So within that situation, he found a type of personal mission, which was to build the Takemusu dojo, okay? Now, a lot of people kind of talk about his time in Iwama and that Iwama was a special place. Well, yeah, you could argue that. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not, but it was special because that was where he was. And he underwent a type of development during the war. And if he'd done that in another location, that would be special. And all places are special, okay? So, I mean, in the history, Iwama is, obviously is a major Aikido center, but it's a center because of him and the development he underwent during the war there. Not long after, I had another mystical experience. I was standing in my garden at 2 a.m. A phantom image of myself appeared and engaged me in swordplay. At first, I could not counter the phantom's moves, but then I began to anticipate his cuts and thrusts and control him. What happened? The image disappeared in a flash. This went on for 3 days. Then suddenly, there were no longer images, just beams and clouds of light. I did not feel like I was holding a wooden sword any longer. It seemed as if I was breathing in the entire universe. This experience lasted 2 weeks. I then felt completely renewed and had the experience of sensing the entire universe within my body. I realized that enlightenment attained through religious practices and enlightenment gained through Budo or martial arts training were the same. I shed tears for the blessing I had received. I saw all of creation, humans, plants, animals, fish, insects, as being interrelated and emanating from one source. I was full of gratitude and respect for the divine. That was when I stopped focusing on the physical techniques of Aiki. The only thing remaining was sho, chiku, bai, which is pine, bamboo, plum, swordplay. The single most important technique was misogi practice. I saw clearly that all of the people of the world were members of one family. As the Emperor Meiji wrote, all people of the 4 seas are brothers. Let us all join hands and work together. Now, what we would add these days, see, the Japanese sometimes is the gender stuff is jin, can be both masculine and feminine. So this is that all people of the four C's are brothers and sisters. Okay? So with that in mind, I just thought what we do is go and just do some movement. But we're faced with a variety of things. A lot of tension, a lot of fear in my system about what's happening tomorrow. But for me, the actual practice, the misogi per se, is to try to stay grounded in what he calls love, no matter who wins. And I do have my preference, it's very strong, that we don't want to give in to hate and contention. That creates separation. And again, a story I had one time when I was in the courtyard where the cars were parked, for people that rent in the dojo space on Martha Street. There were a couple of musicians, and we were talking in that courtyard area, and they were African American, and we were talking about America. And my statement was something like, I don't know that I believe in America, but I believe in Captain America, the spirit of America. And so no matter what happens tomorrow, whether we feel in our hearts that love wins or hate wins, we don't want to give in to hate. And we actually measure ourselves by the acts that we extend forward through love. And there is a certain belief or faith in my system that love cuts through hate. That is, in essence, there's personal misogi. And one of the things I thought was interesting was that a phantom of himself appeared. And initially, he couldn't do anything. But then he started to adapt. And at some point, the image disappeared. So, he was somebody who really trained to perfect himself as a warrior. And so it's possible he was facing a psychic, interior image of himself. And that finally, he won over that. And what happened for him, he felt the whole universe as a unity inside himself. And so we've continued to train, to perfect our craft, our art. But ultimately, what he did is win over himself. And part of him was still wanting to be very, very strong and to win. But you're facing yourself there. And so, yes, there was a kind of a battle within himself. And what happened when he did win? He won over himself. And then there was that sense, the whole universe, the way he put it, was inside his body. Not just the concept of it, but experientially. He talks a lot about body and spirit. Now there's mind, okay? Mind, body. But my sense a little bit, when the mind and the body go into some sort of balance, then we get the spirit. And so sensing the fullness of creation of the universe inside his body meant it wasn't just something that he was thinking about up here and trying to look for out there. It was something that was actualized deeply inside him. So tomorrow, I've sort of discussed what we're going to do. We're going to follow the election, but we're going to see if we can get all the loose ends here environmentally and also other things in order. So win or lose tomorrow, will have used and devoted tomorrow as a type of misogi cleansing. And so that part of it is very important. We all have reasons to hate what's going on right now. But love, the ability to extend that. That doesn't mean that the things we could hate aren't going on, but it's our response to them. And then what happens here, ideally, is that we face ourselves. Osensei faced himself in the form of that phantom swordsman. So let's go into the other room. And we are set up. We'll bring this down a little bit. Make sure everything is okay. And we have a guest. This is my cat. And she was in this house, and there was a dog in the house. And so she kind of sort of froze into our bedroom space. She didn't leave that for a long time. But what's happening now is she's kind of needing, like, so all of us to kind of stop feeling confined. And so she's investigating the rest of the house, which she really couldn't do when there was the dog, okay? And, that was over a year ago that the dog actually was no longer a factor. But what she's doing here is she's expanding, okay? She's a little shy, so she kind of, she spent some time under a drum set that one of my housemates has, and there's another housemate that has a piano, so she's going from the drums to the piano. But I thought what we do here, let me, so she may run in and out, okay? So Osensei talked about what he calls chiku, okay, which is chiku no ken. All right, so I just thought maybe we would kind of address that for a little bit. Now, we also addressed the sense of he faced the phantom image of himself. Okay? So, chiku, sho, ume, it's plum, triangle, okay? We oftentimes, we stand point, base, triangularly. Chiku, take, bamboo, circle. And bai is pine, matsu, square. Okay. So, in the sword play, based upon sho, chiku, bai, triangle, circle, square, right? So a couple of things. We've been doing a lot of work, with the staff, but let's just start out. We may go to that, but we're going to start out with the sword, or in this case, it's a bokken. Okay? Now, several things. Point, base. A little bit of a slant, isn't there? If I'm here, you see the right and left of me are very, very exposed. The other thing right there is the closest thing is the wrist. Kote. If somebody were to strike or cut my wrist, I'd be very compromised, okay? So there's a slight twist. In other words, if you're facing somebody, this is pointed towards their left eye. And when you see that right here, you see that the sword protects the wrist. Okay? Now the staff is a little different. You stand in a much more open triangle. Sword. So right here, for example, the quickest thing to do is somebody just swing and take my wrist. So by tilting just a little bit, form that triangle. It's not as extreme as when we're doing the staff spear. Okay. Now, we were to execute a cutting motion. Somebody is coming to cut this way, right? What we do a little bit, you see, the body triangulates. So we're both executing the cut and at the same time, in receiving the cut, we're off the line. See, in this way, somebody could be first and could let that go by. And victory right here is instead of, I got you, ha ha. The sense of it right here. You're showing the opening. Somebody comes with an aggressive movement. You're able to let that go past. Now, sometimes, there's movement to the side, but to make that too obvious, I actually draw the cut. Raising together, so it's almost like you and your partner are part of the same updraft, in-breath, whatever you want to call it. Now, when that out-breath comes, that's triangle. So there's that sense where this is a larger beat. And as that cut is coming, we are triangulating the body. You see how right here, this is much more of a spear or staff form. And if we examine that, there is a triangle. The opening is sort of like a circle. We have our kitty back. Okay. And there's a balance here. Both, the terms are uke, nage, they're separate from that with the sword technically. But person that's attacking, person who receives the attack. Right? So that's the triangle. Now, there's a more direct form of the triangle. The person raises, and instead of raising with them, boom, we open and thrust. Okay? Now, what we're wanting to do with that is not kill or win, but we are putting the attack on hold. And again, right here, as I see, the sword also rotates. Turning of the wrist is also an opening movement. So that would be boom, right to the face or throat. Right when somebody's gone like this, you're intercepting. We're putting on hold that attack, showing an opening. So that's the basis of show, of the triangle, okay? So, if somebody's coming in, you can either simultaneously, you both cut. In a certain case, letting them cut first, showing the opening, or boom, being right there and putting that attack on hold. If we go back over what Osensei is saying, what we want to do is not so much I beat you, but boom, you're extending love. You're showing the vulnerability that the attacker has. Boom. Okay? And boom, that motion. Or that motion. It's okay, don't worry, our cat is kind of perched right on a stand, or she's there. She may come in and out. That's okay. All right, she's expanding. Instead of being caught in that room and going nuts for 7 months, she's starting to venture out, which is healthy. We also need to, because in some sense, we're kind of the pandemic, the isolation, the chaos in the world, economically, politically. We need to, wherever we are. And if we could be like Osensei and all of a sudden just sort of relax, win over ourselves, start to feel the universe in our body. What would that feel like? Open, accepting. And yes, there's stuff going on out there. But the Misogi, when he says, feel the universe. And what's part of the universe is space-time, so the ability to kind of read that or read that. So what I just did is imagine a phantom partner. Somebody's about to come in, boom. Now what I'm going to do, we put that on hold, but by going this way, they're coming in and we're also right here. Okay, so you can train with a phantom partner. All right. Now another variant on this one is that motion. Still triangle. Now what happens, let's say I'm in a position, I'm going to be the person to attack. Well, the forward hand draws back. So the hand that's at the handle becomes the forward hand as that person is coming to the boom. So right at this particular point, reading that energy, boom. This goes right underneath. This is the backhand. But it becomes a forward hand when there's a raise. Boom. And right there, there's kind of what we call the stasis. You are not winning, beating that person, but you are showing the vulnerability, creating a stasis. Now, what happens is that there's a tension that builds. So right about here, then they complete their attack, but you are that way, right? So in some sense, training that way, you begin to read the energy. All right. If you train with a phantom partner, in a lot of ways it's harder than training with a physical partner. When you do that, we have to kind of figure out a training pattern and we practice it. And there's a stage where that is necessary. But right about here, at the wrist, boom. Okay, at the wrist. So you take that away, the tension, there's a release. There's that motion. Or move backing up, boom, we intercept. Okay. Now the triangle can run both ways. For example, we go like this, then we go like this, and then we go like this. Now, this can help me go to the other side, release, boom. Now what I may do right there, because when the cut happens, the forward hand, which becomes the back hand of the raise, becomes forward hand. You may take the wrist. I don't want to take the wrist in a way where the person can slash me here. So I'm going to take the wrist, establish a space where the length of the sword would miss me. So within that, boom, 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 boom. What I'm really doing right there is the phantom attacker. It's a movement of ki. Over here, boom. Over here, boom, boom. Okay, so you can actually, you're fencing with yourself. Boom, 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 boom. The sword is interesting because more than the spear or staff, it tends to create the opportunity for you, boom, to work with the phantom attacker. Boom, boom, boom. For example, here, what happens, somebody may come to cut, boom. I may step back. Now, this isn't a blocking motion, even though this is a simulation. You don't want to go and get a direct hit here because the sword can break. Now, the wooden sword wouldn't, but if you play that this is a real sword, okay? Now, also, you don't want this because it ruins the cutting edge. But you can receive, see, this is like the plum seed. Right to here, it goes from this ridge to where it would be sharp underneath. And when you go like this, boom, you receive it along that ridge. And you go like this, boom. So I'm going back, but instead of thinking block, all I'm really doing is boom, extending ki right to the center line. Boom, it's just a more receptive motion. Receptive means somebody's coming in. It's like you don't immediately go this way. You say, let me just check this out. Yeah, boom. Okay. Now that motion back, boom. You see if I'm like this, the shoulder is exposed, but we're actually forming the sword is kind of like a, right? Somebody comes for the leg, boom. And again, you don't receive it this way or this way. Right? Now what I can do is move a little bit here, which opens up the body for a thrust, but I'm back here. Boom. Right? So within that, the problem is that in order to visualize the phantom attacker, oftentimes you have to have some experience with a partner. It's very difficult to do this without some experience working partner to partner with a sword. But, I'm in this social isolation. And, it's like boom. Right? Boom. Now from here, for example, the actual sense of it is somebody may raise, we're going to come in underneath. And that's the form of the square. Boom. Okay, we could do this if somebody's just coming here. It's a harder entry because boom, we're moving here. And right here, we'd be taking both arms on the raise. Okay, this is the hardest one. Your back foot enters here. Now, if I'm here, I expose the head, so it's very important. Boom. Okay, and instead of being like this, I'm actually in a position where so you see the triangle, and the triangle opening is a bit of a circle. So the circle is something that ties things together. Even here, there's circle. There's circle. And if I'm the attacker, all of a sudden I raise, and that cutting edge is underneath both my arms. My arms aren't cut, but if I were to cut, I'd lose them. So I'm learning about my vulnerabilities. And I'm not being killed, but, oh, right? And there's a building of energy. When this is done properly, you feel almost like, basic for the triangle, circle, square. Okay, this is something that Hikizuchi Sensei taught. You hear somebody raises, boom. You create that tension right there, which you release, but you're moving to the other side. And if you're too close, the leg can be cut. And as in putting your weight down here, the person who wants to raise, you move in. Okay? What I'm going to do is demonstrate that facing away. So somebody is coming in, boom, you're right there. Now you release that, move to the other side. And as you sense the raising, you move in. Triangle, circle, square. And there are other variations, but that's the major one I remember. Okay. So we can try this together. There's a phantom attacker. Right from here, we start to read the raise. We're right there. I have to watch that right there. Now, what I'm going to do, we put that on hold, but we're going to release. There's energy building. We're going to move to the other side. And this is not put your weight out there because somebody cut the leg. It's breathing. The feeling right here is the feeling of the Rokyo, the Yonkyo movement with the spear. Okay. So here, release, here. Now you read the raise of the sword and you move in with the square. And that's a pattern. You know, if you, initially we're learning a form, okay, then we go over here, and then we go over here, all right? You can repeat that, but it is important. So you can create your own phantom attacker, your own training partner. And in some sense, when he was talking about sho chiku bai, I think that's, like I learned that basically from Hikizuchi Sensei. I was coming back from Japan in fall of 1973, and Mary Heine Sensei was talking about, we're going to get you invited to the States. And so, I get called into his office, and so Sensei wa America yuku yo. I mean, says, why? Meaning he referred to himself as Sensei, right? Sensei wa I, right? And he says, America yuku toki ni jaku ni shochiku bai no ken o shieru. And when I go to America, I'm going to teach you the sword play of triangle, circle, square. Okay. And what was it about? It was totally, the fact that, I do nothing about this stuff. When I was there that first year, people who took falls for Hikizuchi Sensei were like Ano Sensei, Tojima Sensei, Yanase Sensei. They were like Shihan level. I was like a black belt candidate wearing a white belt. But what happens is he comes to America and I get called out, I got to pick this up and I don't know what to do, but somehow he makes me look good. I'm supposed to cut. Right, I'm a little, I mean, and, you know, I'm obviously a step slow, but it's almost like, just standing here, all of a sudden, boom, I get the sense I'm supposed to raise, and then boom, and then, he's setting up, there's this fruit tense, I go like this, and all of a sudden there's that there, boom, 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 boom. Okay? And so, that was the stay there, and so I kind of picked the sword up, and my ability to swing the sword was very flawed, right? And I'm practicing the cut, like boom, like that, boom, like that, boom, like that. And then I go back to Japan in August of 1974. So I've been back, maybe about 7 or 8 months, and I remember Richard Nixon resigned just before I left, And so 1974, and I go back, and in the fall, a group of Santa Cruz students that he kind of knew from his visit, Robert Fraser Sensei brought a group to study for the fall. And he taught, some sword classes. And so I got to check, of course, I was up. So, I would attack and whatever I was going to do. And I represented, in some sense, the phantom swords person. And I kind of felt, boom, when he came in, that there was this energy. Or conversely, I go like that, and he'd be somewhere else. And, so there was this interplay of forces, yin yang, fire, water. You say that was the shochiku wai, the triangle, circle, square. And so triangle, release that, the circle. Now, what happened, so, of course, in one of these sword classes, I sort of know that pattern. Okay, for me, it's a pattern. But I'm called up and I'm receiving or being a part of the energy interplay, right? And so he talks about, okay, now I'm going to demonstrate the circle. So we raise together, and I cut, boom. And I still remember the feeling of it, because we raised together, and all of a sudden, boom, he's behind me with that. And that's the circle. And the only thing that I could kind of visualize at that time was there was kind of like this energy tornado around me. And when I was here, he rode that tornado behind me, boom, and cut. It was a very eerie feeling. And he didn't really teach that much, the circle very much after that. But that was like a direct experience of something. In fact, everything with the sword was a direct experience, okay? And there's a famous story, you look at the time, where Osensei and Hikizuchi Sensei go into the Shingu school, but it's at night, dark. And Osensei has a boken that is black. Okay, and okay, so Osensei was teaching, or they were training together. Pitch dark, and Osensei had a black sword, black boken, and there was a moonlit night. So the only light coming in was through the window slats, was moonlight, and so they were fencing in the dark. I think a lot of that is because a lot of Osensei's work was really reading the energy of the phantom attacker. Therefore, when there was a real person he was working with, he had a sense of reading energy. So if you understand your own system, you start to pick up how other systems move. Okay? And so what happened there was, they kind of had a couple of exchanges. And Hikizuchi Sensei said, at one point he came in, boom, and he felt like he had cut something. And Hikizuchi Sensei, had an 8th degree black belt in Iaido, the art of drawing and cutting with the sword. So, he wasn't just somebody who took, he also had high rank in Kendo, where they played with a bamboo shinai, okay? But he also did a lot of work with a regular sword. Boom, 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 boom. Okay? So he knew what it was like to cut. And he felt that in that exchange with Osensei in the pitch dark, that he had cut something. And so, he starts looking around for something. And, as I remember the story, Osensei looks or says to him in that pitch dark, Michio-san wa nani o sagashi. Well, actually, what happened is this. He felt he cut something, okay? And then in the moonlight, he saw Osensei's black sword. And the tip had been sheared off. And so he started groping around in the dark to find the tip. And so Osensei then said, okay, Michio-san wa nani o sagashiteru ka? Well, Michio-san, what are you looking for? And before Osensei, before Hikizuchi Sensei could say, I'm looking for the tip, it was in the moonlight, Osensei reached into the sleeve of his kimono, which he was wearing, narigi, and pulls the tip out and gave it to him. And then he was, what he told Hikizuchi Sensei is, you've now mastered the Aiki sword. And so, the way it was explained was, even though you have a boken, if you master the Aiki, it's alchemical, it becomes a real cutting sword. And that somehow, in that moment with it, there was that exchange, boom. Something in Hikizuchi Sensei matched, something of an Osensei, and so boom, he actually cut the tip of that Osensei's black sword. And that was quite a story. And the contention was also that when you hold something like a Joe or bow, it becomes the spear. Boom, 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 boom. So a lot of the movements we do, for example, here, that's straining and right? So when I'm doing the spear movements, I'm just sort of, there are currents or energies. Boom, 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 boom. When I do the sword work, most of the work with the sword we use, boom. Suburi. Okay, which is important because a lot of that, if you were to say the universe was inside your body, you'd have to have a sense of your body. Okay, And this sword got this sword got boom, boom, and this got boom. Get you on your core, the feeling of a root. The actual movements of the sword right there become very much like the movements of the staff or the spear. All right, but one thing for the sword is boom, you're kind of moving in a way, boom, boom. You're visualizing boom, not just visualizing, but anticipating the movements, boom. And so, today what we covered a little bit was the sho chiku bai, the triangle, circle, square. Now, there's people, that have studied with Osensei, and they kind of saw him do exchanges and everything, and they kind of create their own katas for that, or their own whatever it was. But I remember one time when Ano Sensei was here, and we were all co-teaching, so I had a class, and I think Linda Holiday, since they brought him over, he was going to teach. The theme was weapons, and so I was supposed to do some sword, and of course, Ano Sensei is there, and so as part of it, I was kind of doing, towards the end, I was demonstrating that, and afterwards, Ano Sensei came up to me and says, "Your kumitachi is." The word we used was subarashi, which is splendid. However, really? And what was interesting, I was getting very antsy trying to teach all this stuff. So I called somebody up, and all of a sudden we just started to boom, 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 move. And the thing is, it's not about sword play that way. It's really about, basically, you're working with a real person, not a phantom of yourself. But the sense is, if you have the universe inside you, which obviously I had not, but some sense of it, maybe a little bit of a sense of it, was that your phantom imagery right there is really about the movement of the universe as ki. Moving between yin to yang, yang to yin. Okay, so the exchange right. Boom, boom, boom. Right here, boom, 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 boom. Over here, bigger motion, boom. And so I should probably do that more, but the majority of my work is actually with the staff or the spear. But I hope that maybe you got a sense for, you can all do this. You can all do this. I remember after Hikitsuchi Sensei left, he stayed for a month at my parents' house. And I drove him around for a whole month, okay? As I would go out in the backyard, because, we'd sort of spend some time there, and I would take my staff, I'd take the bokken, and I would just start to move. Because, the energy, where you say the movement of kami, to some degree, was very, very fresh there. And so I would go out there, and I didn't have anybody to train with. And he went back to Japan, but there was all this energy in that backyard because he had seen. So I'd go, oh, like that, boom, 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 boom. And when I see Osensei move, he's just so very fluid right here. And he's using a real attacker, but boom, 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 boom. And if you ask me to make that into a routine, I guess I could create a system of it, but I kind of prefer to keep the aliveness of the experience of the sho chiku bai. It's alive. Any of you can pick up a bokken, create a phantom image of yourself, and train. And that's one of the ways of understanding the yin-yang of energy. Okay, and the way Osensei put it is that all of a sudden that phantom image disappeared, and he kind of felt the universe inside his body. Probably very peaceful, but very alive. Okay? So anyway, we're going to go back into the other room. And so her name is Lily. She's actually getting up there. She's probably 17, 18 years old. And we've been together now for what, about 15. I got her at an animal shelter because one of my other cats went missing. I kept on showing up, hoping that she would be found. And, you know, it'd been a while, so it was pretty certain that she wasn't going to reappear, the cat that I had. So I'm walking, you know, past some cages and looking, you know, for my cat, the one that went missing. And all of a sudden, this little paw reaches out and taps me. She just reached out, chose me. So I looked there, saw her, and I noted that her name was Lily. And so I kept coming back, trying to find the other cat, but then she was up for adoption. And so I adopted her. And we've been together since 2005, yeah. And I was living in the East Hills of San Jose. I had the good fortune that one of the students that was training then, we were a couple who had an extensive property there, and they had a little cottage. And so I was renting that cottage. It was a very, very nice situation. I wish it had continued, but alas, it came to an end. But she lived there. She hunted. You know, it was a lot of hills. I used to go out for hikes. She used to come with me. We used to hike the hills together, when she was a lot younger. Of course, I was a lot younger then too. So this is Lily. So, yeah. She doesn't quite know what to make of this. Okay. You're free. So we're letting her have the run of the house. She's been confined. I mean, some of that was just by herself. She kind of felt that there was a dog out, even when the dog left. She sort of has been there. And also we've been sort of confined here. And so she finally, you know, we just decided to let her air it out. She's got the run of the house. She's, I think, a lot happier, working through a lot of that claustrophobic feeling you get when you're just confined, which we all know. Anyway, we're moving into the other room. So, just checking. Yeah, I guess the question I would have is, anybody have a question about, you know, the you know, way Osensei put it, the sword play of sho, chiku, bai, triangle, circle, square. Anybody have a question or a comment? A lot of taijutsu, or body work, is actually seen in that. In fact, that's the blueprint for a lot of the body technique. Okay? And I kind of suspect, I mean, no sensei, when he was doing the sword, he was training, he was developing himself. And so, you know, what happens is a lot of the people, it's a martial art, Japan, samurai. So, you know, I'm sure that his leading students, they got a chance to kind of do the sword with Osensei. And then a lot of them kind of created their own systems off of that. Hikizuchi Sensei, to his credit, did not create a system. And what I think he tried to pass on, okay, was, this direct experience, the way he put it, key to key, Osensei's key, my key. So, I'm not wasn't up to his level, but, all of a sudden, Hikizuchi Sensei is in the place Osensei was, and I'm sort of the person, in Hikizuchi Sensei's place as a student, just kind of feeling the exchange of the energy. Okay. That, by the way, is very difficult to teach because most people want form. And form, yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
So this has been hard for me because it seems like a lot of people, if you look online or talk to people who do sword work in Aikido, it's kind of form-based around Saito Sensei's kind of thing.
And Saito Sensei is very popular the way that I think another teacher, Chiba Sensei, I heard this as a quote, people like Saito Sensei because he creates forms.
So how, like with the staff, it took me a long time to kind of give up that I wasn't doing something quote unquote real. Like I wasn't, not, you know what I mean? Like I'm doing a martial art, it's not real. So for some reason with the Bokken, I still feel like I can't do something creative or myself because I have this feeling like it's fake or what am I doing? Like, how can I do something?
Well, I think the way I would put it is that it's as real as you are. As you become quote unquote real, it becomes real. Your sword, I mean, if you, for example, gave Stephen Curry a sword, he would pick it up pretty quick. He would pick it up very fast. He went to China, he was doing, I saw, the Tai Chi sequence. He was practicing Tai Chi with people. And, his body work was impeccable. What was off a little bit was his hands were a little too like this. He was a little stylizing way out there, but his movement was like boom. If you gave Chet Baker a sword, he'd figure it out pretty quick. You see, that the point is, people say, I need a system. Yeah, okay. Well, since he studied systems somewhat, but I think he had Katori Shinto Ryu people kind of come in and teach in his dojo. Did he train? No, he may have watched. But then he did his phantom sword play with it. You see what I mean? It is tricky because really, how many of us are going to do anything with a sword? It's just something you do because it's part of Aikido. But, you pick the sword up, it's as real as you. The whole Pinocchio story, right? In the Disney movie, which I haven't seen in ages, is what's his reward? He becomes real. Right? And being real, in Osensei's case, is realizing the universe is inside us. That this is about extending love. And what happens is we run into ourselves. In which case, in his case, he was a highly trained, skilled martial artist, and he fenced with himself. He was a phantom swordsman. But really it represented himself and I. And, and therefore what happens is when he sort of won over himself, his prize was to realize the whole universe was inside him. And basically what it was really about was not winning, but basically if you win if love wins. You see what I mean? The larger universe, Takemusu, is really Take. Musu is the principle of Take generating. Well, there's an original, yin force and original yang force. You can call it heaven, you can call it earth, you can call it water, you can call it fire, you can call it a lot of things, yin, yang. But there's an attraction between those two. And we tend to think of love as an emotion. But love is that which binds and connects. Now, what we do is oftentimes we kind of want to draw the love in. But it was explained to me once, you only really experience love when you offer it. And when you try to bring it in, that's what creates issues. So, all the movements, boom, 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 are extending movements. And, what they are is you're, basically to show the opening. Somebody comes to attack you, then you show them there's a vulnerability there. You don't, if somebody comes to attack you, you show them the vulnerability there. If somebody comes to attack you, all of a sudden, if you can ride the cyclone right around, and that shows a vulnerability. And then when somebody comes this way, this is kind of like, the square in that form is really almost like, is third or fourth and goal in football, with 3 seconds left in time for one play. And that's where you want to give it to your fullback and have them just, in inches, touchdown or not. That's the square, at least in that physical sense, in terms of that or that. What the triangle is like, it's like a quarterback. Boom, slicing the defense up. Boom. Okay. The circle is like having Jerry Rice or some great wide receiver, that runs out there and gets open and catches it. And then it's nice to have that fullback. Or conversely, if you're the quarterback, you have a fullback or a tight end who can be that to give you that time to throw the pass. See, the principles of triangle, circle, square are in everything. But that's why a lot of ways, when like Saito Sensei stuff is very well known. Okay, I actually worked with Saito Sensei one day. He was tremendous, right? But then again, he hung out with Osensei. He absorbed a lot of Osensei's ki. And Saito Sensei had this sort of way of kind of making it into a form that a lot of people liked. Hikisuchi Sensei was very different. He didn't want you to hang on to a form at all. He wanted you to be in something in the spirit of the movement. And he wanted that in a moment-to-moment experiential sense. So the two of them, I don't know that they got along all that well, but Saito Sensei had his empire up north and Hikisuchi Sensei had his consolidation down south. So, there's a lot of space, so they could both be right here and also right up north. They both studied with Osensei, Saito Sensei, of the two of them, was much more successful in terms of passing on tradition, okay? Because what Hikisuchi Sensei tried to pass on was that element of takimusu right in the moment. And that's difficult. And so, what I was doing today was, since it was mentioned in there about the phantom swordsman, we kind of went into the forms of triangle, circle, square, sho, chiku, bai, in terms of the boken. But, I actually do that a lot. I don't have a physical training partner, but all of a sudden, there's energy coming in. Okay, boom, we're off the line, either absorbing it or pausing it. Right? Something's here, we open enough to get behind before we do a motion. See, the actual sho, chiku, bai is in all movement. But if you look at Stephen Curry, for example, he understands the angles. triangle. But he does that because he can shift side to side circle. And then at the hoop, even very underestimated athletically and strength-wise, he can finish square. Or if there's that, he can step back and finish square. Triangle, circle, square, show chiku bai. You're chairman of the board or chief executive officer, you present a proposal or idea. You let everybody kick it around, pro, con. You facilitate coming up with a package. Boom, triangle, circle, square. Everything. Triangle, iku musubi, taru musubi, tamatsume musubi. The Zokan no Sanshin, the three forces of creation, the three origins, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I mean that part of it. I mean, the sword play and everything like that. Of course, Osensei was a genius, but most geniuses are that way. And then how many people have really taken Einstein's stuff and kind of taken it a little further? But Einstein came up with it, right? Carl Jung. I mean, how many? You have Jungian psychology, you have transpersonal psychology, but it was Jung, who is not all that easy to study, who came up with all this stuff. And then a bunch of other people said, wow, this is fantastic. And they formalized it in the Jungian psychology. If you read Jung's stuff, he's pretty far out. He's not easy to follow, right? And so, the triangle oftentimes, is the initiating point. That's the cutting edge of creation. Circle, things circulate, things feel themselves, pro, con, up, down, right, left. And then they consolidate. Many good ideas get very diffuse and just drift. Triangle, circle, square. So when Osensei was doing that and called it triangles, I've never heard Osensei talk about kumitachi. In karate, they say kumite. What does that mean? You spar. Kumite. It's not, you do set practices. But then, you boom, but I've never heard Osensei refer to anything like kumitachi. In his writings, he does refer to sho chiku bai in terms of sword. So, what you've got to realize is that for better or for worse, a lot of what's being passed on in Aikido has been passed on because somebody could formalize it. I don't think Osensei did that at all. I think he was always, like the aliveness of facing yourself. Okay, all right. I'm training with a sword. All of a sudden, there's a phantom image of myself. Okay, yang to yin or yin to yang. Initially, I can't do anything, but then after a while, I start to boom. So there starts to be an equalness between the two, back and forth. So my own training, my own perfection, triangle. If I'm a total klutz, I'm not going to get much. I don't think the phantom image or key is going to appear there. But there's some balance there. Then all of a sudden, the phantom disappears. It doesn't mean key disappears. All of a sudden, your system is infused with it. In other words, instead of, like looking for love, you are love. And it's a very subtle difference, right? Right? I mean, years ago, I was such a great Diana Rigg fan, The Avengers. She recently died, okay? But what happened is they did a disastrous movie with Ray Fiennes and Uma Thurman. Uma Thurman was actually pretty good. It's just the script was crap. And the people that put it out had no idea about what the show was about. So the movie was bad. So I just decided, I don't want that to be my last new memory of that show with Diana Rigg, mainly. And so I wrote this whole story. And we've always thought about, it'd be kind of neat to write an Avengers story. And I always thought I could never do it because I'm not British. And it was such a British show. So what I did do was, without, going into it at all, I created that to be in what Deepak Chopra called the field of infinite possibilities. And somehow I bring her into being the whole character. And then we face together, I get to have an adventure with her in the field of infinite possibilities. And, we face the dark of that, right? Which is my fixation, my whatever. I have to bring in somebody to represent that. And so we actually wind up having an Avengers episode together. But what was very interesting was she was the easiest to write. And I began to realize that, oh, she's inside me. My immediate reaction at that time, this was some years ago, said, well, she can't do me any good, right? I'd rather have her out there. I was thinking, that's amazing. Because I would just come up with her dialogue like that, It was almost like, it was a part of my soul life force because, she represented a very powerful archetype to me. But the goal is not to find the love out there. The goal is to extend the love in such a way that you become love, right? These two great forces tying together by this binding force called love. Well, what does that mean? It means to some degree, the child of these two forces is love. And then we come into being also as a child of those forces. We are born of that love. No love, no birth. And so at some point, these are such contentious times, with the, the pandemic and, the government, and it's so easy to go, but hope. You hope for the sake of hope. You trust for the sake of trust. You love for the sake of love. And that's going to be what, win or lose in the election, that's going to be our path, hopefully, if we learn anything from Osensei's stuff. And sometimes it's a difficult path. So, the thing with the swords, the Shochiku Bai, I think, for Hikizuchi Sensei, he was like an 8th degree black belt in Kendo and an 8th degree black belt in EI. Apparently, Osensei really liked his sword work. And there's actually some photos of him where there was a big gathering at the Iwama school. And there's a big stage, and Osensei is doing sword to sword, or boken to boken. And Saito Sensei is sitting like this. And Hikizuchi Sensei and Osensei are doing the sword. And there's also another clip where it was one of Osensei's last appearances, where Osensei and Hikizuchi Sensei at the New Year's celebration are doing sword to sword. Apparently, Osensei really liked Hikizuchi Sensei's sword. And Hikizuchi Sensei's sword was not easy to understand because it was about, the direct, in the moment of it. I try to do that as best I can. What people really like, they like forms, They like ritual. They like, to some degree, that interaction. But I remember after my second stay, I come back. Mary, Heine Sensei, Linda Sensei, they go to Shingu. So I'm gone. I'm back here teaching at UC Santa Cruz. And they ask all the Japanese, well, what do you think of Jack? And the thing they've all got was, we really don't know him very well. Because basically he was always around Ikitsuchi Sensei and also the other teachers. As much as I had a friendly working training relationship with the Japanese there, I was always kind of, and Ano Sensei would come by and we'd go out. And sometimes, he would ask me to show some Tai Chi moves, or Yanase Sensei would take us, to shrines. Tojima Sensei, I go visit mainly, would invite me over, we'd have lunch and stuff like that. And most of the other time, I was kind of with Hikitsuchi Sensei. And so, that was, that was considered part of the training. In other words, it was not comfortable. All right. Hikitsuchi Sensei actually had a lot of the attributes you might attribute to our current president. Really. I mean, power is power. And, you were around that, and I kind of maybe felt a lot like Dr. Fauci does. I was like, oh my God, this is going on. Oh my God, you know what I mean? And so, you sort of fight, for your own integrity sometimes, because sometimes, without going into details, people do things when they have power. That's why you have to really watch who you give power to. And so, what would happen is that, I would go like, oh my gosh, I'm going nuts here. And so, basically Tojima Sensei would crack me up, or Ano Sensei would take me out. We'd kind of go into nature, or Yanase Sensei would we'd go to a shrine, go hiking. So, I kind of had my support system, but it wasn't like, the people at the dojo, the support system was basically pretty high up. And they understood. They said, well, Jack's going nuts. We better kind of take him out and help him through this period. Because, if I'm Dr. Fauci watching what's going on in the country around the coronavirus, I'm going. And, you can't, so, part of that is just, that was called Shugyo. It was not the training in the dojo. It was really about, everything was like with the sword. And, and I knew it was time to leave when it just got too crazy. Really, I mean, it was like, okay. And that's not to say there weren't some beautiful, beautiful things passed on. But you don't want to get too caught up in seeing your light out there. You want to, and you don't pull that light in, you learn to extend that light out so it comes into you, as opposed to trying to do this. And that's one of the lessons, that we have our openings. We go like that, and all of a sudden we get whacked, right? And, I feel sorry for these people in the country who need a leader that they promote as a cult figure. That means that their own sense of their own aliveness is very dependent and codependent on somebody out there and their personality. And one of the things, lessons-wise, is that we develop ourselves. We, by extending love, as opposed to trying to pull it in, we become that. By thinking, no Sensei's terms, by thinking and acting more universally, the universe starts to come inside us. The universe was also brought into being by these original forces in that binding love. So the universe itself is an expression of that love, as are we. And so when we have that, we don't, I mean, I'm still worried about the election tomorrow, to be honest with you. But, it's not going to kill me if it turns out bad. I'll cope. I'll find other reasons to try to develop. Okay? And I hope I get a vacation from some of that stuff for a while. I hope, but I have my own sense where I want things to go, not that they will go that way. Does anybody else have a question? By the way, Yara, that was very good. That was a very good question or statement. The weapon stuff, is it real? It's as real as we are. You get to. Yeah, but is it real? Yeah. How real am I? The more real I am, the more real what I do is. And we don't look so much at what other people think. Okay, and if I can lie and create various things, then basically I'm not real at all. So, a lot of what Osensei is talking about is about personal development. Anybody else with a question or comment? Okay.
Yeah. I liked the stories you told in class about the fighting the shadow of himself, and about the black sword Boken, and fighting in the dark. The former, I mean, these are kind of archetypal stories, right? I mean, the former reminds me of like Luke Skywalker in The Empire Strikes Back fighting Darth Vader, and he realizes he's just fighting himself because he's in the cave. And
I mean, the Star Wars stuff is basically, I mean, where did George Lucas get a lot of his inspiration? He got it from Joseph Campbell.
Yep.
Mythologist who studied, archetypal patterns, culture to culture to culture. So yeah, I mean,
the swords reminded me of like Stormbringer versus Mournblade, even like a black Boken, right? It's like Stormboken. But the scene where like Irkun and Elric are in the cave, the pulsing cavern, and they're squaring off with the two swords, and it's really the swords that are squaring off. And the way you talked about it with Ikazuchi Sensei, he realized he cut something. It's almost as if he wasn't, it wasn't his desire to cut something. He just, the sword did it, right?
Well, something
in a way
came through him that put him at a level that he hadn't been before, and Osensei recognized it. You see? And, the other thing was that Osensei didn't yell at him, well, you ruined my best sword, screw you, I'm going to punish you. It's like, hey, pretty cool, kid. You just mastered that aspect of the Aiki sword, right?
Well,
kind of the more magical aspect. I mean, if you kind of look, for example, at the Elric stories, I mean, what is Elric's major opponent is actually Stormbringer. Stormbringer is both an ally and an enemy, right? And at the very end of it, you begin to realize, I mean, Moorcock wrote the end when he was still really young and vital. He got to be a better writer. But the earlier stories have a type of power to them. And so, what happens is he finds out he kills his best character off. So he writes all these prequels, right? That's fine. I enjoy them all. But, the sense there where the instrument, because something you have to win over, right? And, what Elric kind of gets, at the very end, of course, he gets the sword. Okay. But at that point, you see, the sword kind of represents some part of himself. And even though the sword is his ally, there was that area where, the sword actually, there's a unification, right? And he kind of sees, at the end, this hand, right? Which is kind of like it was comforting to him somewhat. that there is kind of a balance. And, to some degree, Elric was a fascinating character because, he's being pulled along by this destiny, which to us is really fascinating, but as a character was really traumatic to him. And if somebody says, okay, Jack, here's Stormbringer, you could think, wow, I can decimate armies. There's that side right there. But then, you really get the fact that, the sword is an aspect of yourself. And that, the thing is, what does the sword do? The sword eliminates all his attachments. It kills his first love. It kills his wife. It kills his best friend, to the point where he's going, oh, and then all of a sudden, right, his attachment to himself as, the mournful eternal champion, right? And he realizes that he's a part of the sword, which is pretty much immortal. Okay. And it's fascinating. I remember I read that, the Stormbringer, I read it in one sitting. I did not put it down. I just read the whole thing through. Not that long, but I remember going through all those archetypal landscapes with him, in there. And oh man, that was like really, really just very vivid to me.
Well, you brought up Carl Jung, and Mike Moorcock was consciously using Jungian imagery in those books.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
like he was like
yeah.
this was a design decision on his part, very conscious.
Yeah. I mean, basically, when you write off of the archetypes, you are working through. And I think I read something that Michael Moorcock, quoted somewhere. It's like, he was working through a lot of his stuff in the early Elric books. And of course, as he got older, he got to be a better writer, and he kind of fleshed it out and expanded the multiverse, right? But that whole thing right there, is that that the Elric character to me was like a major archetype. If you go into the Japanese samurai stuff, the full moon swordsman, it doesn't have a black sword, but he has the full moon cut. And they're the same archetype. I wrote that story, about Chet Baker and Stormbringer. Baker, same archetype. Same archetype.
Well, a lot of these guys, like Osensei and Chet Baker and Elric, were fictional. Even Mike, if you want to be a writer and you're like, try and look at Michael Moorcock, they don't really, some of them, like the Buddha, right? Some of them try to create paths for people to follow. The Buddha was like, here, I did it the hard way. Here's the easier way, the Eightfold Path, whatever. But it doesn't really work. It gets you, it gets a lot of people a lot of things, but it doesn't make you the Buddha or Osensei or, there's something about these individuals and the path that was not a straight line, right? Like Elric's path is not a straight line. Even his stories are written out of order.
No, it's true.
Mike's path, Michael Moorcock's path is not a straight line. And that's true of life in general, right? So you can either go on a jagged path to somewhere, or you could just go on a jagged path, right? Like most of us just sort of go, where we are, and we do what we do. But like my music teacher, Allah Akbar Khan Sahib, whose father had been considered the greatest musician of India in the 20th century. And when Allah Akbar Khan Sahib was a young man, he told us he was like 18 hours a day, for years, for like 20 years, having a practice. And well, what does that mean? Well, he still had to have meals and stuff. So like he had to fix food for his parents. He had to do things, but he was like constantly, like he'd go do something and then he'd practice. But he was always trying to get out of it, like a young person would. Like he was trying to sneak off or whatever, and his dad would catch him. And it was not a direct path, but there was definitely this, this obviously an internal energy, because when he left home, he kept doing it,
Yeah.
I mean, he was so old that he was training to be a court musician in British controlled India, right? In the Raj system. That's how he was trained. He was of that generation. And when independence happened in 1947 and the court patronage system for musicians vanished, musicians had to like figure out how to do concerts for money to the general public. That was a new thing. And so he had to, like, those were his choices and his steps that he made as an adult. And so it was, but it wasn't always like, there's no straight line, right? Like his path was set out. He was going to be a court musician, for some prince. And that was his job description. That he was, and it didn't work out that way because the whole country completely, went independent. World War II and then independence, and so I think that, I guess the bottom line is I really like the way you're teaching sword, because and other weapons in general, because even though there's value in, like, the sword 30 movement form or whatever as a training tool, ultimately, if you're doing Aikido or anything else, you're doing the improvised version, right? Like you have the structure. It's like jazz, where you have the chord progression of the piece that you're working on, but you're doing, like in sitar music, when I play a raga, it's never the same way twice. You're not supposed to play it the same way twice, right? You can't. And so I guess what I'm saying is just like that whole, if you're fighting with yourself or whatever, it's going to be different every time. If you're in a dark, dojo with Osensei, it's going to be different every time, right? Like if they'd done it 10 times, Kazuchi Sensei wouldn't have chopped 10 pieces off 10 bokens, right? It would have all been
pretty much
different, So I think that the forms are useful, but they're a means, not an end.
Well, I mean, you take a piece like, Chet Baker's most famous piece is My Funny Valentine. But how many different ways can you play that? There are measures, there are chords, da 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 da, but you go da 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 da. I mean, in that way, Stephen Curry talks about a couple of moves. He says, and then, the progressions are infinite.
Yeah, well, even the creation of that song, it was Rodgers and Hart.
Yep. And
it was just a song. And
That's
they collected a bunch of songs, and they did a play that they just strung just as an excuse to get the songs on Broadway. And that was Babes in Arms, which I was in a production of in high school. So that's how I know all this history. And then Rodgers and Hart had a professional breakup, and Rodgers and Hammerstein became the pair. And then they rewrote Babes in Arms. And so that's the version I was in, where it was like the second version of the play. But I mean, it was such a kludge that literally the main character's name was Valentine White, just so the leading lady could sing My Funny Valentine.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I had fun in that play. I played the bad guy. It was the best role. But the point is, even that wasn't a straight line, right? It was one of the greatest songs in history. And so when you play it, every time different, even the play it was enmeshed in, there's two versions.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's an area where, what we see, art is very different than anything that's linear. Art is art. And, the point with Osensei was, you think his life was art. His life was Aikido.
Well, so, martial arts are arts, right?
Yeah, ultimately, and what Bruce Lee found is just everybody gets too attached to these patterns, right? And there's a reason for it. If you don't have some grounding, but for example, Baker, he didn't know what key he was playing in. Okay, I mean, he goes in. I can't remember the band leader, but you know, he's got absolutely no reputation. You know, he played in the army a little bit. You know, in San Francisco. He kind of gigged in some of the jazz cafes there, and he goes back to Southern California, and so he takes his horn in, and I can't remember the guy's name. He says, "Can I sit in?" The guy says, okay, kind of very warily. And so he says, what key would you like to start it in? And Baker says that I want to start on this note, da. And the guy thought, oh, we are in trouble, right? And then what happened is that, you know, Baker joined, you know, just played with these people. And the guy that was, you know, who was running the gig said, hey, he's so fresh. He's so new. This is really great. And then they would do something. Sometimes they would try to trick him and say, we're going to start in this key. And so he'd go, okay. And they would put it in a different key. And it didn't matter to him because they didn't know what key he was playing in anyway. He just blended with the notes, right? I remember one of the biggest compliments I got was one of, you know, his best friend maybe was Art Frank, the drummer. And I put something on Facebook where I just took the chord sequence from Cherokee, which is a standard, and I just improvised off of it, right? I just said, well, I'm not playing the whole song. I'm just improvising off the chords. And so he kind of, you know, just put this comment, which I still have saved somewhere. He said, hey, you're playing like Chet now. It's swinging. He said, mainly, he said, you're not following the chords. You're playing around and through the chords. Good job. I was going, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Indian music, it's all the rhythm cycle that it's built on. And you can't just like play on it. You sort of dance around it. You know. And a really good tabla player or whatever percussion instrument will kind of dance with you, and then boom, you guys come together, and it's this beautiful moment. You know,
well, in a sense, Osensei was doing with the Phantom Swordsman, his own internal, external, you know, his own psyche, his own whatever it was in him. And probably one of the last things he had to overcome was he was so good. But then all of a sudden, he's you know, he's facing this version of himself that's better than him. And he can't do anything. But he hangs in there. Then all of a sudden, he starts to kind of lead. And then the second, you know, that harmony happens with that interior part of himself, he feels a universe inside him. That he realizes not about beating anybody out there, not even just even. You went over yourself by going back to that primal unity that everything comes out of. And that's not a linear path. You can't say you learn all these forms and you're going to get there. We're all there. We're just in a type of delusion that we're not. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is clean that delusion up to get to some better sense of who we are. And the way he put it, if you understand yourself, you understand the universe. This is the way he put it in one of the things in one of his, you know, I just read it this morning. He said, yeah, that's you know, I mean, you know, that's a pretty big statement. So winning over yourself, what is that about? It's about understanding who you are. If you understand that, then to some degree, you understand the whole purpose of the universe, of the creation. Now, those are big words. And we're faced with an election tomorrow, which is a big test. But I would like to think that no matter who wins tomorrow, and I definitely have my hopes, there'll be a certain person, okay, that we win and that America and the world wins. And then we start to maybe set other waves in motion. The way Osensei put it is like, you know, he's given the divine mission to stop the war. Okay. And so, you know, he does all this stuff and the war does end. I mean, of course it ends, and he knows, he can sense that the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were going to happen. I mean, I think he told Nado Sensei that, you know, when it was happening, he felt it, and he felt the children burning. In other words, he didn't necessarily seclude himself into a mystical state. He felt that internally and very, very vividly. A lot of times when you're that gifted, you know, I mean, basically Stormbringer is a great gift and Stormbringer is a curse. You know, and, you know, the whole thing right there is very, I think what we ought to do is probably kind of call it for today. Okay, so I thank you all for hanging with me. Make sure if you have not voted,
Thank you,
you
Sensei.
vote. Take care.